Welcome to Two Tall Guys Talking Sales. I'm your host for this session. I'm Sean.
And I'm Kevin.
And together we're going to talk about a unique problem that you might be having in your sales process and your sales world. This 15 minutes is designed for salespeople, sales managers, and CEOs of the company that are trying to increase their revenue and trying to be more productive in your sales processes. So let's get started.
Hey, Kevin, it's good to see you back on the podcast. Thank you for everybody out there in listener land for being on this podcast as well. And we hope that you get value out of this meeting and this conversation, because this is going to be about meetings, Kevin. I think we're going to talk about, as a high-level title, be respectful. Start your team meetings on time and end on time. But in general, let's talk about the weekly meeting that you'll have with your salespeople as a sales leader. You want to kick us off?
Sure. As a weekly sales meeting with the sales leader, we've talked a little bit before in some of our previous content about the one-to-one meeting, but this is about the formatting of it, what to do if and what to do when. So really it's the reminder to all the sales leaders out there that our meetings need to be time bound. In the same way that we want our team to show up on time, or individually, we want to make sure that we, as leaders, are also on time. So the setup here is, what are we doing that is already a best practice, and what else could we do that where we're not quite measuring up to what a best practice for having a meeting could be?
I agree. I'm a big believer that if this meeting is supposed to start at 4:30, which is when this podcast is going to drop, that it's going to start at 4:30. And I'm going to start talking at 4:30. And please be on time for my meetings. Now, everybody out there in listener land, they're listening to this as a podcast. You can start the same time you want. But when you're having a meeting and you're having other people in the room, it's appropriate for you to be ready 5 or 10 minutes before the meeting starts so that you can start the meeting on time. I kind of align this with a sales call. And there's an old saying, and everybody's heard it: if you're not early, you're late. Or if you're early, then you're on time. If you're on time, then you're late. Different variations on the same theme. If I'm going to have a meeting with a customer, and I'm actually going to visit that customer in their building, now that we can do that, now that's post-COVID, I'm going to arrive for that meeting 15 minutes early, 20 minutes early, whatever I think makes sense to get from the front desk of the building back to the conference room where there's going to be other people, or the executive's office, whatever the case might be. It takes some amount of time to make that logistical thing happen. So I'm not going to arrive for a 12:30 meeting. I'm not going to walk into the lobby at 12:30. I'm going to walk in, if it's a 12:30 meeting, I'm going to walk in the lobby at 12:15 or 12:10. And you get better with that as you get to know that customer. How long does it take to get to back there? The same thing needs to happen with your sales meetings, those weekly meetings, or maybe it's maybe it's every other week meeting. But the same thing needs to happen there. You need to be ready 5 or 10 minutes before. You need to expect that all of your salespeople, all your sales team is going to be there 5 or 10 minutes before, so you can start on time and you can stop talking about how the football team, or how the basketball team, or how did you see that great play at home plate? You can get that all out of the way right away. What are your thoughts, Kevin?
I do want to, highlight that in a post-COVID world, right, we have all, as leaders and as attendees of these meetings, we've developed some pretty good and pretty bad habits. So I want to call those out before we get too far down the road here. Best practices are always, like you just said, be on time. But the next best practice is allowing enough time between meetings so that you can be on time. If we were in a room full of people right now, I could do the thing where I say, if you've ever scheduled back-to-back meetings, raise your hand, and almost all of us would raise our hands. And we all know what kind of challenge that presents for us as people delivering content and receiving content. Never enough time to change gears. So best practice, being respectful to your audience as a leader, is making sure you got enough time to prepare. Because I'm guilty. I'm guilty as charged. I've come in, hot from one meeting to the next, and My content suffered because of it. So, as a best practice, definitely allow enough time between meetings, whether they're virtual or in person. The same rules apply. There's a common thought of published thought out there around allowing at least 15 minutes between bookings. Applying that as a rule to your digital calendar appointment is a best practice there. So I like to lead off with saying, hey, there's good and bad practices. If you're catching yourself in those bad practices or not quite best practices, there's no time like the present to make a change.
Totally agree. I think that being on time is probably the most respectful thing you can do for your team. And just to say, I value my time with you, so I'm on time. So the next thing is ending on time. Sorry, I spoke there for a second. So a lot of our clients at least have read the book Traction. Some of them are EOS clients, and this podcast is targeting to small and medium-sized businesses, many of whom have read Traction or have implemented EOS or something like EOS. There's other formats out there. EOS has this belief of L10 meetings, and L10 meetings always are supposed to start on time and end on time. So that's the other thing, is be respectful that it's going to get done and drive the topics of the meeting so that we get done on time. And you have to be, as the sales leader, you need to be driving that. You need to be in charge of that. You need to be looking at the clock at all times.
100%. Sean, I'd like to dig in on this topic a little bit with you, because when we talk about meeting formats and content, we're actually just talking about a system, which is something you and I do day in, day out for salespeople. Why have a system? It's because when you systemize the process, you can reliably forecast and plan for results. When we show up to a meeting with a plan for content, time allocation, and consistency, we can really take the training wheels off of building successful organizations, sales organizations, because the content becomes so much more valuable when people know how to prepare for a sales meeting, and it's on time and it ends on time. All of these things allow, I was about to say inhibit, but actually allow for greater success in the short term and for the long term. That's my opinion. I'd be curious to know if you've got a slant on that or a verbal high five. I don't know.
Verbal high five. So I'll tell you my standard meeting that I'm going to have especially if it's a weekly meeting, right? So once again, let's make sure everybody's plugged into this concept. We are not talking about one-on-one meetings, and we're not talking about the quarterly or the annual meeting that you might have with your entire team together. This is your catch-up meeting. So I treat it as a catch-up meeting. It's going to be probably 60 minutes in length, and that might vary depending on how many people are on the team at any given time. And it also might vary based on the fact that I may have a guest speaker come in to talk about something specific. But let's just say it's a regular meeting with no guest speaker. I'm going to start off with going around the room. Tell me what great thing happened for you last week, and tell me what great thing is going to happen next week, this coming week. Now that I try to do it for business, but if somebody says, I just had a baby, then, let's celebrate that as well. That's perfectly fine, right? If that's your great thing, then that's your great thing. But I really try to get everybody to talk. Tell me about what's going to happen this week. And then after that's done, and that'll take 2 minutes a piece, something like that, maybe 3 or 4 minutes a piece, depending on what I block out. Then I'm going to say, okay, let's let Joe, Sam, Sally, whoever did something great. And remember, I've had one-on-ones with everybody, before the meeting. What did Joe or Sam or Sally do last week? Maybe it was 2 weeks ago, whatever. That was really unique. That was really positive. And I want to build them up a little bit in their peer group, which is the other salespeople, other sales team members, so that they can get a little accolades of that went really well. And that's a best practice maybe we can all learn from. I try to do that right after the round robin. So I've just talked a lot. Any thoughts on that, Kevin?
Sean, that's great. I'm glad you talked a lot there, because that's really valuable. And for the listeners out there, when you're thinking about having effective meetings, we started out by talking about time management and being respectful, but as important to that start time and being respectful is the pre-planned content, and making sure that we know what's going on in our sales organizations. In a group meeting, we should not be surprised as leaders by things going on in the sales discipline, sales and marketing alignment. These things should be known, and we should use these opportunities to share and cross-pollinate. We want to work on, accentuate our strengths and cancel out our weaknesses, and really focus on how we can create separation from our competition with our solutions. Now, that's a little bit of jargon speak there, but it applies. If you take and just apply that high level thinking to what do we do better than our competition? How do we do it better? And is everyone on our team doing it as well as each other? The answer is probably not uniformly yes. That means there's always something to improve on. So the purpose and content direction of the meeting being driven by us should be focused on those areas to draw out best thinking for the organization and application of it. I want to dig in a little bit deeper on one topic that I think we probably all face from time to time, and that's how to deal with people that are either over talking the entire meeting or dominating the conversation, and how to reel them back in. Or similarly, when the topic goes way off base or off the mark and we have to reel a conversation back in, my best practice is to say, thank you for that, right? To interrupt and pattern interrupt, using my Sandler terms here, but pattern interrupts with a thanks for sharing that. But let's refocus our conversation on this. You?
Totally agree. Well, first of all, make sure that you're not guilty of it, right? That you're not the one that's doing those bad things. So stay on your agenda and have the same agenda. I have the same agenda for every single meeting. Now, the speaker may be different, but the agenda is the same. The structure is the same, which is one of those things you can learn from an L10 meeting, to have the same structure so everybody can expect it. The person who talks too much, who always wants to say something, that's a one-on-one conversation with them and say, Joe, that's really good. You have really good insight, but you're kind of overcoming everybody else, or you're dominating the conversation. Let's make sure that Sally can speak a little bit more and make that more of a team kind of a thing. So, but that's a one-on-one conversation. If they're doing that, you're going to do it after the meeting, after they've done it for a couple of meetings in a row. Maybe they have something to prove. Maybe they're scared for their job. Maybe, and that's why they're talking so much. Maybe they're frustrated, whatever. So there's usually a root cause for somebody that talks all the time during a meeting. The person that sidetracks, chances are that's also a good conversation point. But I think what you said was exactly true. Let's stop it, acknowledge it, get the conversation back to where we had in the agenda, and then talk to that person after the meeting. It's like, you brought up some good points there. Should we have, in our next meeting, next week, should we focus on those things that you just talked about? Once again, there may be valid information, or there may be something that's bothering that person. That's why I got sidetracked. Maybe you want to have that with a group meeting. Maybe you just want to have that with the one-on-one if you know what that's all about. But almost always there is a hidden agenda for that person that talked too much.
Completely agree. And Sean, I think now is a really important time for you and I to call out, why exactly are Sean and Kevin talking about having respectful meetings? And I want to point back to what we do for a living. We build infrastructure, sales organizational infrastructure for businesses. That's what we do first, because without that infrastructure, it's really tough to recreate success. By having sales meeting infrastructure, one-to-one meeting infrastructure, sales processes, compensation places, these are the things we talk about, because these are the component level pieces that we implement to drive success in growing and building organizations.
Absolutely. One of the challenges that we have as fractional VPs of sales, fractional chief revenue officers, is what's going to happen when we leave. So we want to put best practices in place at the beginning of our engagements. We want to solidify those throughout the course of the engagement that we're having, so that when we leave, because we will leave, that's the role that we've chosen in our lives. That's what we're getting paid for, is to come in and help fix things. When we leave, it sticks. So we want to put best practices in place, and having team members be respected, have their opinions be heard, have their message be honed, and have their best practices be shared is just a simple best practice that big companies everywhere have done. We try to implement those without the overhead burden that big companies have. And we try to do those in small companies. And Kevin,
Yep.
to be respectful, we got to wrap this up.
We got to end on time. Absolutely. So join us next week when we'll unpack the ideas of focusing on 2 key topics for your meeting. So it's really, now we got a format. What are we going to talk about in the middle of that meeting? So catch us back on the flip side next week. And until then, happy selling. And that's a wrap. Thanks again for joining Kevin and Sean on 2 Tall Guys Talking Sales. Tune in every Tuesday, or when our podcast drops every Tuesday at 4:30, wherever you consume your podcast. And don't miss our monthly CEO workshop, where we unpack some of the big CEO questions facing your business. Until next time, we're looking forward to seeing you. Happy selling.